Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This is a journey about family, greed, and discovering who truly deserves your love and fortune. Enjoy the story. My name is Theodore Harrison, but everyone calls me Ted. I'm 67 years old, and 2 weeks ago I buried my beloved wife Margaret after 43 years of marriage. What I'm about to tell you happened just 14 days after I said goodbye to the love of my life, when I thought my son Kevin would be my only comfort in this world of grief. I was wrong, dead wrong. Margaret died after a brave 2-year battle with cancer. Those final months, I barely left her side. I took early retirement from my accounting firm to care for her, to make sure she had everything she needed, to hold her hand through every treatment and every sleepless night. Kevin, our 35-year-old son, visited occasionally during Margaret's illness. He'd stay for an hour, maybe 2, then claim he had important work meetings or social obligations. His wife, Vanessa, was always busy with their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, too busy to help with Margaret's care. The funeral was small, but beautiful. Margaret had wanted a simple ceremony, and I honored her wishes. Kevin gave a brief eulogy that sounded more like a rehearsed speech than heartfelt words about his mother. But I was too lost in my own grief to think much about it then. For 2 weeks after the funeral, I wandered around our family home like a ghost. 43 years of memories lived in every room. Margaret's coffee cup still sat by the kitchen sink. Her reading glasses were on the bedside table. Her garden was beginning to bloom with the spring flowers she'd planted before getting too sick to tend them. Kevin called me on a Tuesday morning, asking if he could come over to discuss family business. I was grateful for any contact with him, any sign that we could support each other through this difficult time. When Kevin arrived that afternoon, he wasn't alone. Vanessa was with him, and they both had serious expressions that made my stomach clench with worry. "Dad, we need to talk," Kevin said, settling into Margaret's favorite armchair without asking. "Vanessa and I have been discussing your situation." "My situation? Dad, you're 67 years old, you're alone in this big house, and let's be honest, you're not handling Mum's death very well." I stared at my son, trying to understand what he was getting at. "I'm grieving, Kevin. It's been 2 weeks since I buried your mother." "That's exactly what we're talking about. You're depressed. You're not taking care of yourself, and frankly, this house is too much for one person to maintain." Vanessa nodded along, though she looked uncomfortable with the conversation. "We've found you a nice apartment," Kevin continued. "Small, manageable, perfect for a single senior citizen. You'll be much happier there." "Kevin, this is my home. This is where your mother and I built our life together. Dad, Mom is gone. Keeping this house isn't going to bring her back. And honestly, maintaining a property this size is a huge financial burden that you can't afford on a fixed income. I owned the house outright. There was no mortgage, no financial burden." But I didn't argue because I was still trying to process what Kevin was suggesting. "We'll handle everything," Vanessa added quietly. "The apartment is already available. We can help you pack your essential items this weekend." "And what happens to the house?" Kevin's expression hardened slightly. "The house will be sold, obviously. The money can go toward your care and living expenses." That's when I understood. My son wasn't worried about my well-being or my ability to live alone. He wanted my house. "Kevin, I'm not ready to leave this house. I'm still grieving, still processing everything. Can't we wait a few months?" "Dad, that's exactly why this needs to happen now, while we can help you make rational decisions. Grief clouds judgment, and we can't let you make choices you'll regret later." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for, and saw a stranger, a cold, calculating stranger who was using my grief as an excuse to take my home. "What if I refuse?" Kevin's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "Dad, we're trying to help you here. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." "This is my house, Kevin. I'm not leaving." "Actually, Dad, we've already paid the deposit on the apartment. The lease is signed. You're moving this weekend, whether you like it or not." The words hit me like a physical blow. My son had signed a lease for an apartment I'd never seen, committing me to a living situation I'd never agreed to. "You can't force me to move, Kevin." "We're not forcing you, Dad. We're helping you face reality. You're an elderly man who just lost his spouse. You're not thinking clearly. Someone needs to make responsible decisions for you." That weekend, Kevin and two of his friends showed up with a moving truck. They packed one suitcase of my clothes, a few personal items, and told me everything else would be handled appropriately. I watched them load my belongings, 43 years of marriage, memories, photographs, Margaret's things, into boxes that would go to storage or donation centers. "Kevin, please, at least let me keep your mother's jewelry, her photos, her garden, tools. She loved that garden. Dad, you won't have space for any of that stuff in the apartment. Besides, hanging on to material possessions isn't healthy. You need to learn to let go." As they drove me to a cramped one-bedroom apartment across town, I realized that my son hadn't just taken my house. He'd stolen my memories, my connection to Margaret, my sense of home and belonging. But Kevin had no idea what he'd really done. He thought he was evicting a helpless old man with limited resources and no options. What he didn't know was that the helpless old man he'd just thrown out of his own home was worth $18 million. $18 million that I'd been planning to leave to him and Emma. $18 million that Kevin had just forfeited through his greed and cruelty. As I sat in that tiny apartment that first night, surrounded by boxes and the sound of strangers through thin walls, I made a decision. I wasn't going to tell Kevin about the money. Not yet. First, I wanted to see exactly what kind of man I'd raised. I wanted to understand if there was any decency left in him, or if Margaret and I had somehow failed completely as parents. The test was about to begin. Sitting in that cramped apartment that first night, I couldn't sleep. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbors' televisions, their conversations, their footsteps. After 43 years in our quiet family home, this felt like living in a fishbowl filled with strangers. I found myself thinking about the $18 million that Kevin didn't know existed, and how I'd managed to accumulate such a fortune without even Margaret knowing the full extent of it. It started 40 years ago when I was just beginning my career as a certified public accountant. I'd always been good with numbers, good at seeing patterns that other people missed. In the early 1980s, I began noticing small technology companies that had potential but were being overlooked by major investors. I started small, investing a few $100s here and there in companies that were developing something called personal computers and software. Most of my colleagues thought I was wasting money on science fiction fantasies. When Microsoft went public in 1986, my small investment turned into something substantial. When Apple recovered from its near bankruptcy in the late 1990s, my holdings multiplied again. I kept reinvesting, kept looking for the next breakthrough. The secret was patience and research. While other people were chasing get-rich-quick schemes, I was studying annual reports, analyzing market trends, looking for companies with solid fundamentals and innovative products. By the 2000s, I diversified into real estate, buying small office buildings and residential properties in areas I believed would develop over time. When the tech boom exploded, when remote work became commonplace, those properties tripled in value. The hardest part was keeping it secret from Margaret. She would have worried about the risks, insisted we use the money to upgrade our lifestyle or take expensive vacations. But I loved our simple life together. I loved that Margaret was proud of our modest home. that she found joy in her garden rather than expensive jewelry, that we were happy with who we were rather than trying to impress anyone. I'd planned to surprise her with the truth when we retired. I'd imagined showing her the bank statements, watching her face light up as she realized we could travel anywhere in the world, do anything we wanted in our golden years. But cancer stole that future from us. Margaret died believing we were a middle-class couple with a comfortable but modest retirement fund. She never knew that her husband was quietly wealthy beyond her wildest dreams. The irony was bitter. All that money, all those years of careful planning and investment, and I couldn't use a penny of it to save the woman I loved most. Now, sitting alone in an apartment I'd been forced into by my own son, I thought about Kevin and how I'd failed him as a father in a completely different way. Margaret and I had struggled to have children for years. She'd suffered 3 miscarriages before Kevin was finally born, and the doctors told us he would likely be our only child. We treated him like the miracle he was, but somewhere along the way, that gratitude turned into overindulgence. Kevin never heard the word no growing up. When he wanted expensive toys, we bought them. When he struggled in school, we hired tutors and made excuses rather than expecting him to work harder. When he got into trouble, we fixed his problems instead of letting him face consequences. I remembered the time Kevin crashed his car during his senior year of high school, drunk driving, though we never reported it. Instead of letting him deal with the legal consequences, I paid for the damages and convinced the other driver not to press charges. I told myself I was protecting Kevin's future, but I was really protecting him from growing up. When Kevin got married to Vanessa, I paid for an elaborate wedding that cost more than most people's houses. When they bought their first home, I secretly helped with the down payment. When Emma was born, I set up a college fund without telling Kevin, wanting him to believe he was providing for his daughter on his own. I'd spent 35 years enabling Kevin's worst impulses while convincing myself I was being a loving father. Margaret had sometimes questioned whether we were doing too much for him, whether we were preventing him from developing independence and responsibility. "He needs to learn that life has consequences," she'd said after one particularly expensive bailout when Kevin was in his 20s. "We won't always be here to fix his mistakes." But I'd always found reasons to justify one more rescue, one more financial gift, one more solution to Kevin's self-created problems. I'd told myself that supporting your children was what good parents did, that we were lucky to be able to help. Now, I understood what Margaret had seen years ago. By never allowing Kevin to fail, by always cushioning him from the natural consequences of his choices, I'd raised a man who believed he was entitled to whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. Kevin's decision to force me out of my home wasn't a sudden burst of cruelty. It was the logical extension of 35 years of believing that other people's needs and feelings were less important than his own desires. He wanted my house, so he took it. He wanted me out of the way, so he removed me. He'd never learned to consider anyone else's perspective because I'd never required him to. The money I'd been planning to leave him was supposed to be a final gift, a way to secure his and Emma's future. But Kevin had just demonstrated that giving him $18 million would be like handing a loaded weapon to someone who'd never learned gun safety. Lying in that narrow bed, in that tiny apartment, listening to sirens and late-night conversations. Through the walls, I made another decision. Kevin would have to earn any inheritance he received from me. He'd have to prove that he was capable of thinking about someone other than himself. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep his selfishness went. I needed to see if there was any possibility of redemption in the son I'd raised, or if I'd completely failed as a father. The $18 million gave me options I'd never had before. I could test Kevin's character, I could protect the people who truly deserved help, and I could make sure my money went to someone who would use it for good rather than greed. Margaret was gone, but her values lived on in my memory. She'd taught me that wealth meant nothing if it wasn't used to help others. That family was about love and loyalty rather than money and inheritance. Kevin was about to learn whether he'd inherited any of his mother's wisdom along with her house. 2 months passed in my small apartment before Kevin contacted me again. During that time, I'd heard nothing from him, no phone calls checking on my well-being, no visits to see how I was adjusting, no acknowledgement that I was his father dealing with the loss of his mother. The silence spoke volumes about Kevin's character, but what happened next revealed even more about the man I'd raised. I was having breakfast with Rose when my phone rang. Kevin's name appeared on the screen, and for just a moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe he was calling to apologize, to check on me, to suggest we rebuild our relationship. "Dad, I hope you're settling in well at the apartment." His voice was cheerful, almost artificially so, like he was reading from a script designed to sound caring. "I'm managing, Kevin. It's been an adjustment. I'm sure it has. Listen, Dad, I was hoping we could get together for lunch this week. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you." My heart jumped. Maybe Kevin was finally ready to acknowledge what he'd done to me, to talk about repairing our relationship. I'd like that very much. "Great. How about Thursday at noon? There's a diner near your apartment called Murphy's. Do you know it?" We met at Murphy's on Thursday, and from the moment Kevin walked in, I could tell this wasn't going to be the reconciliation I'd hoped for. He looked nervous, distracted, like someone preparing to ask for a favor rather than rebuild a relationship. "Dad, you look good. The apartment seems to be working out for you." "It's smaller than I'm used to, but I'm adapting." Kevin nodded absently, clearly thinking about something else. We ordered our food and made small talk about the weather, about his work, about everything except the elephant in the room, the fact that he'd forced his grieving father out of his own home. Finally, after we'd finished eating, Kevin got to the real reason for our meeting. "Dad, I need to ask you for some help, financial help." There it was. Not an apology, not concern for my well-being, but a request for money. "What kind of help, Kevin?" "I've got an opportunity to invest in a commercial real estate project. It's a sure thing, but I need to move fast. The problem is, most of my capital is tied up in the house renovations. My house, which he'd stolen from me, was now requiring expensive updates. How much do you need?" $50,000. "I know it's a lot. But Dad, this investment could set our family up for years. The returns are projected to be incredible." I stared at my son across that diner table, amazed by his audacity. He'd thrown me out of my home, cut off contact for 2 months, and now he wanted me to fund his business ventures. "Kevin, where exactly would I get $50,000? I'm living on a fixed income, and as you pointed out, I need to be careful with my money." "I know, Dad. And I wouldn't ask if this wasn't such an amazing opportunity. You must have some savings, some CDs or investments from all those years of working. And if I give you this money, what happens if the investment doesn't work out?" Kevin's expression shifted slightly, revealing a hint of the manipulation tactics he'd probably been planning. "Dad, that's exactly the kind of negative thinking that's been holding you back. Successful people take calculated risks. Besides, I wouldn't ask for money unless I was absolutely certain about the returns." I thought about the $18 million sitting in various investment accounts, earning more in monthly interest than Kevin was asking to borrow. I could have written him a check without even noticing the impact on my net worth. But this wasn't about the money. This was about understanding what kind of person Kevin had become. "Let me think about it," I said. Kevin's disappointment was obvious, but he tried to hide it behind false understanding. "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need, but remember, opportunities like this don't come along very often." After he left, I sat in that diner for another hour, processing what had just happened. Kevin hadn't asked about my health, my emotional state, or my adjustment to the massive life changes he'd forced on me. He hadn't mentioned Margaret once, despite the fact that we were both still grieving the loss of the most important woman in our lives. The only reason he'd contacted me was because he needed money. Over the next week, Kevin called me 3 times to check in, but every conversation eventually circled back to the investment opportunity and how much it could benefit our family's future. Finally, against my better judgment, I decided to give him the money. Not because I believed in his investment or trusted his intentions, but because I wanted to see what he would do with it. I wanted to understand how he would treat the father who helped him when he needed it. I wrote Kevin a check for $50,000, money I could easily afford, but which represented a significant sacrifice for the modest retiree Kevin believed me to be. "Dad, thank you so much. This means everything to me. I promise you won't regret this. Kevin, I'm trusting you with money I can't really afford to lose. This represents a large portion of my savings. I understand completely, and I take that responsibility seriously. You'll see returns on this investment that will make both of us very happy." As I handed him the check, I felt like I was conducting an experiment in human nature. I was giving Kevin everything he'd asked for, putting myself in a vulnerable financial position to help him succeed. His reaction to this generosity would tell me everything I needed to know about his character. What I discovered over the following weeks was worse than even my cynical expectations had prepared me for. The apartment Kevin had chosen for me was everything our family home wasn't. Small, cramped, impersonal, and surrounded by the constant noise of other people's lives. But what hurt most wasn't the physical discomfort. It was the systematic way Kevin was erasing every trace of Margaret from the world. I'd been in the apartment for 3 days when I decided to drive by our old house. I needed to see it one more time to convince myself this was really happening. What I found there broke my heart in ways I hadn't expected. Kevin had wasted no time in gutting our home. Through the windows, I could see that Margaret's furniture, pieces we'd saved for and chosen together over 4 decades, was gone. Her antique dining table, where we'd hosted countless family dinners, the rocking chair where she'd nursed Kevin as a baby, the bookshelf filled with novels she'd collected since college, all of it had been replaced or removed. A dumpster in the driveway overflowed with items that represented our entire marriage. I saw Margaret's gardening tools sticking out of the pile, the ceramic planters she'd painted by hand, even the welcome mat she'd bought the week before her diagnosis. Kevin was erasing 43 years of our life together like it had never existed. When I knocked on what used to be my own front door, Vanessa answered with an expression of surprise and discomfort. "Ted, what are you doing here?" I was hoping to get a few more of my things, some of Margaret's photo albums, maybe her jewelry box, things that have sentimental value. Vanessa looked back into the house nervously. "Kevin isn't here right now. He's at work. Vanessa, you've known me for 10 years. I'm not asking for anything valuable. I just want to keep some memories of my wife." "I know, Ted, but Kevin said you needed to focus on moving forward instead of clinging to the past. He thinks keeping Margaret's things will make your grief worse." I stared at my daughter-in-law, this woman I'd watched become a mother, whose baby showers I'd attended, whose birthday parties I'd helped celebrate. She was treating me like a potentially dangerous stranger. "Did Kevin tell you I was forced to move out?" Vanessa's expression became even more uncomfortable. "He said you agreed it was best. He said you realized the house was too much for you to handle alone." Kevin had been lying to his own wife about what he'd done to me. "Vanessa, I never agreed to anything. Kevin forced me out. I didn't want to leave." "Ted, Kevin said you were having some confusion about things." "About what?" "Was discussed and decided. Confusion. Kevin was setting up a narrative where his elderly father was becoming mentally unstable, unable to remember conversations or make rational decisions. It was a clever strategy that allowed him to justify taking control of my life while maintaining the illusion that he was helping me. I'm not confused, Vanessa. Your husband took my house against my will and forced me to live in an apartment I never chose. I think maybe you should talk to Kevin about this when he gets home. She closed the door gently but firmly, leaving me standing on the porch of my own home like a stranger who wasn't welcome. That evening, I was unpacking the last of my belongings when I heard a soft knock on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw an elderly Asian woman holding what appeared to be a casserole dish. "Hello," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Rose Chen from 3B. I brought you some soup. Moving is always stressful." Rose was probably 75 years old, with kind eyes and a warm smile that reminded me of Margaret's natural ability to make people feel comfortable. "That's very thoughtful. I'm Ted Harrison. I know it's none of my business, but I heard you moving in the other night. It sounded like you were alone, and I thought maybe you could use a home-cooked meal." Rose's soup was delicious, and her company was even better. She'd lived in the building for 8 years since her husband died, and she understood the challenges of adjusting to a smaller space after losing a spouse. "The hardest part isn't the size," she told me as we shared tea in my cramped kitchen. "It's feeling like your whole life got compressed into boxes that don't fit anywhere." Rose had raised 3 children who all lived in other states now. They called occasionally but rarely visited, too busy with their own lives to spend time with their elderly mother. "I don't blame them," Rose said. "They have jobs, families, obligations. But sometimes I think children forget that their parents are still people with feelings and needs." Over the next few weeks, Rose became my closest friend in this new life Kevin had created for me. She helped me figure out which grocery stores delivered, which neighbors were friendly, and how to navigate the building's peculiar rules and procedures. But Rose also helped me understand something important about my situation with Kevin. During one of our evening conversations, she asked me directly about my son. "Ted, I hope you don't mind me asking, but why did you really move here? You don't seem like someone who would choose this kind of change voluntarily." I told her everything about Margaret's death, Kevin's demands, the forced move, the lies he was telling Vanessa about my mental state. Rose listened without judgment, but her expression grew more concerned as I continued. "Ted, that's not normal family behavior. Children are supposed to support their parents during grief, not take advantage of their vulnerability. I keep wondering if I failed as a father, if I somehow created this situation by spoiling Kevin too much when he was growing up. Maybe you made mistakes. All parents do, but that doesn't excuse your son treating you cruelly as an adult. At 35 years old, Kevin is responsible for his own choices and character. Rose helped me see that I wasn't obligated to accept Kevin's treatment just because he was my son. Family relationships required mutual respect and consideration, not just obligation and guilt. "What are you going to do?" she asked. That's when I decided to tell her about the money. Not the full amount, that would have been overwhelming, but enough to help her understand that I had options Kevin didn't know about. "Rose, Kevin thinks he's taken advantage of a helpless old man with limited resources. But I have money he doesn't know about. Enough money to change my situation if I choose to. Why haven't you told him? Because I want to see who my son really is when he thinks I can't fight back. I want to understand whether there's any decency left in him, or if I need to accept that I raised someone fundamentally selfish." Rose nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we have to test people to learn their true character. But Ted, be careful. If your son is as manipulative as he sounds, he might be dangerous if he discovers you've been hiding money from him." That night I realized Rose was right. Kevin had already demonstrated that he was willing to lie, manipulate, and emotionally abuse me to get what he wanted. If he discovered I'd been hiding millions of dollars from him, there was no telling how he might react. But I was committed to my plan. Kevin would have to prove he deserved any inheritance from me, and so far, he was failing that test spectacularly. The question was how much worse his behavior would get before I decided I'd seen enough. 3 weeks after giving Kevin the $50,000, I was beginning to wonder if maybe I'd been too harsh in judging my son's motivations. He'd called twice to thank me again for the loan and to update me on how well the investment was proceeding. "Dad, you're going to be so proud of this decision. The initial projections are already being exceeded." Maybe Kevin really was trying to build a better future for his family. Maybe I'd been allowing my hurt feelings about the move to cloud my judgment about his character. That illusion was shattered on a Wednesday afternoon when Rose knocked on my door with a concerned expression. "Ted, I need to show you something, but I'm not sure you're going to want to see it." Rose handed me her tablet, opened to Kevin's social media page. What I saw there made my stomach drop. Pictures from Paris. Kevin and Vanessa standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, dining at expensive restaurants, shopping on the Champs-Élysées. Post after post documenting an elaborate European vacation, with captions about living life to the fullest and making memories that last forever. Kevin had used my $50,000 not for any investment, but for a luxury vacation with his wife, Rose. When were these posted? Yesterday and today. "Ted, I'm so sorry. I debated whether to show you, but I thought you needed to know." I scrolled through more photos. 5-star hotels, first-class flights, expensive wines and meals. Kevin was spending more money in a week than most families had for an entire year, all funded by what he believed was his elderly father's limited savings. But the photos were only the beginning of my discovery. That evening, I decided to drive to O'Malley's, a bar near Kevin's office where I knew his colleagues sometimes gathered after work. I needed to see him in person to give him a chance to explain what I'd seen online. I found Kevin at a corner table with 3 other men, all of them laughing loudly over drinks that probably cost more than my daily food budget. I positioned myself at the bar where I could hear their conversation without being noticed. What I heard destroyed any remaining hope I had for my son's character. "The old man actually fell for it," Kevin was saying, gesturing with his whiskey glass. "I fed him some story about a real estate investment, and he handed over 50 grand like I knew he would." "Your dad has that kind of money?" one of his friends asked. "Not really, but he's got some savings. And the poor bastard is so desperate for my attention that he'll do anything I ask." The men laughed and Kevin continued his performance. "You should have seen him at the diner, trying to act like he was being careful with his money. The whole time I'm thinking, just write the check, old man, so I can get to Paris." "Isn't he still grieving your mother?" Dad's been wallowing in self-pity for months. The Europe trip was exactly what Vanessa and I needed to get away from all that depressing energy. One of Kevin's colleagues looked uncomfortable with the conversation. "Kevin, doesn't it bother you to take money from your father when he's going through such a difficult time?" Kevin's response revealed everything I needed to know about who he'd become. "Look, my father is 77 years old. He's got maybe 10 years left, probably less. That money is going to be mine eventually anyway. I'm just accessing my inheritance a little early." The group fell silent, apparently shocked by Kevin's callousness. "Besides," Kevin continued, "what's he going to do with $50,000? Buy more sweater vests? The man has no life, no interests, no reason to spend money on anything meaningful. At least Vanessa and I are using it to create memories and experiences." I sat at that bar, listening to my son reduce my life to sweater vests and meaninglessness, and felt something inside me break. This wasn't just financial fraud, it was complete dehumanization of his own father. Kevin wasn't just stealing my money. He was stealing my dignity, my worth as a human being, my right to be treated with basic respect and consideration. The funniest part, Kevin said, is that he thinks I'm going to pay him back. Like I'm actually going to return money to a man who won't live long enough to need it. That's when I understood that Kevin wasn't just selfish or immature. He was fundamentally cruel, capable of deliberately causing pain to the person who had loved and supported him his entire life. I left the bar without confronting him. I needed time to process what I'd learned, to decide how to respond to this level of betrayal. Driving back to my apartment, I thought about the $18 million Kevin didn't know existed. He believed he was stealing from an elderly man with limited resources, someone who couldn't afford to lose $50,000. Kevin had no idea that his inheritance, the money he felt entitled to take early, was worth more than he could imagine. But he'd just demonstrated that he didn't deserve a single penny of it. That night, I called my attorney and made an appointment to update my will. Kevin had made his choice about what kind of son he wanted to be. Now I was going to make my choice about what kind of father I was going to be in response. After 2 months of Kevin's complete silence and systematic character assassination, I decided it was time to gather more information about what my son was really doing with his life. I needed to understand the full scope of his deception, not just his treatment of me. I hired James Morrison, a private investigator who specialized in family and financial matters. James was a former police detective with 30 years of experience, and he came highly recommended by my attorney. Mr. Harrison, what exactly are you hoping to discover about your son? I want to know everything: his financial situation, his marriage, his daily activities, his real motivations for forcing me out of my home. I suspect there's more to this story than just wanting my house. James's investigation took 3 weeks, and what he uncovered was far more disturbing than I'd expected. Kevin's financial situation was a disaster. Despite earning a good salary as a marketing manager, he was drowning in debt due to lifestyle choices that were completely unsustainable. Mr. Harrison, your son has maxed out 8 credit cards, taken out 2 personal loans, and borrowed against his 401k. His total debt load is approximately $200,000. The Paris trip I'd unwittingly funded was just the latest in a series of extravagant vacations and purchases that Kevin couldn't afford. James showed me credit card statements documenting expensive dinners, luxury shopping sprees, and weekend getaways that had been financed entirely through borrowing. How is Kevin hiding this from Vanessa? That's where it gets complicated. Your son has been intercepting financial mail, creating fake bank statements, and using a separate credit card for most of his discretionary spending. As far as his wife knows, they're financially stable. Kevin was living a double life, maintaining the appearance of success while secretly accumulating massive debt. The stress of keeping this secret was probably part of what drove his increasingly erratic behavior. But James had discovered something even more disturbing about Kevin's personal life. Mr. Harrison, your son is having an affair with a co-worker named Jessica Palmer. The relationship has been going on for about 8 months. Since shortly before your wife's death, the timing was sickening. While Margaret was dying and I was caring for her around the clock, Kevin had been starting an extramarital affair that he was hiding from his wife and 8-year-old daughter. Are you certain about this? James showed me photographs of Kevin and Jessica at restaurants and hotels, clearly intimate and comfortable with each other in ways that went far beyond friendship. The affair is definitely sexual and emotional. Your son has been spending money he doesn't have on gifts and trips for this woman, which explains some of his financial problems. Kevin wasn't just stealing from me and lying to his wife about money. He was betraying his entire family while maintaining a facade of being a devoted husband and father. There's something else you need to know, James continued. Your son has been consulting with a financial advisor about options for accessing his potential inheritance early. What kind of options? Kevin told the advisor that he was concerned about your mental decline and wanted to explore legal guardianship, options that would give him control over your finances. He's been researching how to have elderly parents declared incompetent. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Kevin wasn't just content with stealing my house and my savings. He'd been planning to take control of my entire financial life by having me declared mentally unfit. James, if Kevin had succeeded with that plan, what would have happened to me? Worst case scenario? You could have been forced into a nursing home while Kevin gained legal authority to manage your assets however he saw fit. Kevin's cruelty had levels I hadn't even imagined. He wasn't just treating me badly. He was actively planning to destroy my independence and autonomy for his own financial benefit. But James had also uncovered information that gave me some hope for my granddaughter, Emma. Your granddaughter has been asking her mother questions about why she can't see you anymore. Vanessa has been struggling with Kevin's explanation that you're too unwell for visits. What has Vanessa been told exactly? Kevin convinced his wife that you're experiencing early-stage dementia and that spending time with you would be confusing and upsetting for Emma. But Vanessa is starting to question this story because Emma keeps talking about how much she misses her grandfather. The morning after discovering Kevin's betrayal at the bar, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced since Margaret's death: clarity. For months, I'd been confused and hurt by Kevin's behavior, wondering if I was somehow misunderstanding his motivations or being too sensitive about his treatment of me. Now I knew exactly who my son was and exactly what he thought of me. I decided to test Kevin one more time. I called him and asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss how the investment was progressing. I wanted to see how convincingly he could lie to my face, knowing what I now knew about his true actions. Dad, I'm so glad you called. The investment is performing even better than we projected. You're going to be very happy with the returns. Kevin's ability to lie smoothly and convincingly was almost impressive. He sat across from me in that coffee shop, looking directly into my eyes while fabricating an elaborate story about commercial real estate developments and projected profit margins. When do you think I'll see the initial returns? I asked. Probably within the next 6 months. These kinds of projects take time to mature, but the foundations are very strong. Kevin, I need to ask you something directly. That $50,000 represents most of my liquid savings. If something goes wrong with this investment, I won't have any financial cushion left. Dad, nothing is going to go wrong. I stake my reputation on it. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen the Paris photos, if I hadn't heard his confession at the bar, I might have believed every word. After our coffee meeting, I made a decision that would change the course of our relationship forever. I was going to stop trying to reach Kevin, stop hoping for reconciliation, stop giving him opportunities to prove he had any decency left. Instead, I was going to let him show me who he really was without any interference from me. Over the next month, Kevin's true character emerged in ways that were both predictable and heartbreaking. First, he completely stopped contacting me. No phone calls, no text messages, no inquiries about my health or well-being. As far as Kevin was concerned, once he'd gotten my money, I ceased to exist. When I tried calling him, my calls went straight to voicemail. When I left messages, they weren't returned. When I sent text messages asking about the investment returns, they were ignored. Kevin had gotten what he wanted from me, and now I was disposable. But his cruelty went beyond mere neglect. Rose, who had been keeping an eye on Kevin's social media activity, brought me evidence of something even more disturbing. Kevin had been posting jokes and memes about elderly parents who were burdens on their adult children. Photos with captions, Like when your dad thinks you owe him something just because he raised you, and the awkward moment when your elderly parent expects you to babysit their emotions. My son was publicly mocking the very idea that parents deserved respect and consideration from their children. The most painful discovery came when Rose found a private group Kevin had joined called Dealing with Difficult Aging Parents. In this forum, Kevin shared detailed stories about his unreasonable father who refused to accept reality about his living situation and tried to manipulate him with guilt about his dead mother. Kevin had turned our family tragedy into entertainment for strangers online, but the post that finally broke my heart was one where Kevin described forcing me out of the family home. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions for people who can't make them for themselves. My dad was so attached to material possessions and memories that he couldn't see how unhealthy his living situation had become. Moving him to an apartment was the best thing I could have done for his mental health, even though he fought it at the time. Kevin had rewritten history to make himself the hero of a story where he'd saved his confused elderly father from his own poor judgment. The responses to Kevin's posts were overwhelmingly supportive. Dozens of people shared their own stories about difficult aging parents, about the burden of making decisions for people who couldn't think clearly anymore. My son had found a community of people who validated his worst impulses, who convinced him that his selfishness was actually heroic caregiving. Around this time, I also discovered that Kevin had been spreading lies about me to extended family members. My sister called from Arizona after receiving what she described as a concerning phone call from Kevin. "Ted, Kevin told me you've been having some memory problems and that he had to move you into assisted living for your own safety. He said you were becoming aggressive and paranoid." "Sarah, I'm not in assisted living. I'm in a regular apartment that Kevin forced me to move to after he decided he wanted our house." There was a long pause. "That's not what Kevin told me. He said you agreed it was necessary and that you were grateful for his help. Kevin lied to you, just like he's been lying to everyone else." But I could hear the doubt in Sarah's voice. Kevin's version of events sounded more plausible to people who didn't know the full story. A concerned son helping his elderly father make necessary life changes was easier to believe than a cruel son stealing his father's home out of greed. Kevin was systematically destroying my reputation and relationships, ensuring that if I ever tried to expose his behavior, people would assume it was the paranoid delusions of an elderly man with cognitive problems. The isolation was complete. Kevin had taken my home, my belongings, my money, and now he was taking my credibility and my connections to the people who had known me for decades. But Kevin had made one crucial error in his planning. He'd assumed that I was powerless to fight back, that I had no resources beyond his charity and no options beyond accepting his treatment. Kevin had no idea that the man he was systematically destroying had $18 million and the motivation to use every penny of it to expose his son's true character. The test was over. Kevin had failed spectacularly, demonstrating levels of cruelty and manipulation that I couldn't have imagined when this whole ordeal began. Now it was time for Kevin to face the consequences of treating his father like a disposable burden instead of a human being worthy of love and respect. The real question was whether Kevin would recognize his mistakes when confronted with the truth, or whether he was too far gone to ever become the man Margaret and I had hoped to raise. James had been monitoring Kevin's communications with the financial advisor and discovered that Kevin was planning to accelerate his timeline for gaining control over my finances. "Your son is becoming increasingly desperate about his debt situation. He's been making minimum payments on his credit cards by borrowing from other sources. But that's not sustainable much longer. How long before he hits a financial crisis? Based on his current spending patterns and debt accumulation, maybe 6 months. He's going to need a significant influx of cash, or he's going to face bankruptcy. That explained Kevin's growing urgency about accessing what he believed was my modest inheritance. He wasn't just greedy. He was panicked about his own financial survival. "Mr. Harrison, there's one more thing you should know. Your son has been telling people that you're wealthy, but hiding money from the family out of spite." "What do you mean?" "Kevin apparently believes you have more assets than you've revealed, and he's been suggesting to friends and even to his financial advisor that you're deliberately keeping him in financial distress by withholding your resources." The irony was staggering. Kevin was absolutely right that I was hiding significant wealth from him, but his reasoning was completely wrong. I wasn't withholding money out of spite. I was protecting it from a son who had demonstrated that he would abuse any resources I gave him. "James, I need you to document everything you've found. Financial records, evidence of the affair, communications about guardianship plans, all of it. What are you planning to do with this information?" "I'm going to use it to protect myself and the people I care about from my son's manipulation and greed." That evening I sat in my small apartment reviewing James's report and thinking about the man Kevin had become. The son I'd raised was a liar, a cheat, an adulterer, and someone who was actively planning to steal my independence and dignity for money. But I also thought about Vanessa and Emma, who were innocent victims of Kevin's deceptions. Vanessa believed she was married to a financially responsible, faithful husband who was making difficult but necessary decisions about his elderly father's care. Emma believed her grandfather was too sick to see her. Both of them deserved to know the truth about the man they were living with. Rose knocked on my door while I was still processing James's findings. "Ted, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" I told her everything. Kevin's debts, his affair, his plans to have me declared incompetent, his lies to Vanessa about my mental state. Rose listened with growing horror. "Ted, this man is dangerous. He's not just selfish. He's actively destructive to everyone around him." "I know, but I'm not sure what to do with this information. If I expose Kevin, I destroy his marriage and hurt my granddaughter. If I don't expose him, he continues manipulating and stealing from everyone he claims to love." "What would Margaret want you to do?" The question stopped me short. Margaret had always been the moral compass in our marriage, the one who could see clearly through complicated situations to the right course of action. Margaret would want me to protect the innocent people in this situation, Vanessa and Emma, even if it meant exposing Kevin's crimes and destroying his carefully constructed facade. Margaret would also want me to use my resources to help people who deserved help, rather than allowing them to be wasted on someone who had chosen cruelty over compassion. "Rose, I think it's time to stop testing Kevin's character. I think I've seen enough. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to show Kevin exactly what his greed and cruelty have cost him, and I'm going to make sure that the people who deserve help get it, regardless of their blood relationship to me." The $18 million Kevin didn't know about was going to become the instrument of justice that revealed his true character to everyone who had been deceived by his lies. But first, I needed to protect Vanessa and Emma from the fallout that was coming when Kevin's world collapsed around him. Thursday afternoon came, and I met Vanessa at a quiet coffee shop across town from where Kevin worked. She looked nervous and uncomfortable, like someone who'd been convinced she was humoring the delusions of an elderly relative, but was afraid of what she might discover. I'd spent 3 days organizing James's evidence into a presentation that would be undeniable, even to someone who desperately wanted to believe in her husband's innocence. "Vanessa, thank you for meeting me. I know this is difficult. Ted, before we start, I need you to know that if this is some kind of attempt to cause problems in my marriage, I'm going to leave immediately. This isn't about causing problems. This is about preventing bigger problems that are coming whether we discuss them or not. I opened the folder James had prepared and showed Vanessa the first document, Kevin's real credit card statements showing the $200,000 in debt. These are your husband's actual credit card bills from the past 12 months. You can verify the account numbers with the credit card companies if you want independent confirmation. Vanessa studied the statements with growing alarm. Ted, these can't be real. Kevin shows me our finances every month. Our credit cards have small balances that we pay off regularly. Kevin has been creating fake statements for your review while hiding his real spending. Here are bank records showing cash advances and balance transfers that don't appear on the statements he's been showing you. I watched Vanessa's face as she processed the financial evidence. Her expression moved from skepticism to confusion to dawning horror as she realized the implications of what she was seeing. $200,000. How is that even possible? Expensive vacations, luxury purchases, dinners at high-end restaurants, and gifts for his girlfriend. I showed her photographs of Kevin and Jessica Palmer at restaurants and hotels, clearly intimate and romantic in their interactions. Vanessa stared at the photographs for a long time without speaking. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. How long has this been going on? About 8 months, since shortly before my wife's death. While your wife was dying, while we were dealing with Margaret's illness, Kevin was starting an affair. Yes, and using money he couldn't afford to spend on someone who wasn't his wife. Vanessa's shock was giving way to anger, but I could see her struggling to reconcile this evidence with the man she'd been living with for 10 years. Vanessa, there's more you need to know. Kevin forced me out of my home, not because he was concerned about my well-being, but because he wanted the house. He's also been telling people that I'm experiencing dementia to explain why I don't visit or why my story about what happened might not be reliable. Kevin told me you were having memory problems. He said moving you to the apartment was necessary for your safety. I never agreed to move. Kevin gave me no choice and no time to make other arrangements. He wanted my house, so he took it. I showed Vanessa the evidence of Kevin's lies to extended family members, his posts in online forums about difficult aging parents, and his consultations with financial advisors about gaining legal guardianship over my assets. Kevin has been systematically destroying my relationships and reputation while planning to gain control over my finances by having me declared mentally incompetent. Vanessa was quiet for a long time, processing everything I'd shown her. Finally, she spoke in a voice I could barely hear. Ted, if all of this is true, then I don't know who I'm married to. Vanessa, I need you to understand something else. Kevin borrowed $50,000 from me 3 months ago, claiming it was for a business investment. He used that money to take you to Paris. The Paris trip was funded by his investment profits. That's what Kevin told me. There were no investment profits. Kevin spent what he thought was a significant portion of my retirement savings on a vacation, then lied to both of us about where the money came from. Vanessa put her head in her hands. Why are you telling me all this? What do you want from me? I want you to protect yourself and Emma before Kevin's financial house of cards collapses completely. Based on his debt load and spending patterns, he's going to face a crisis very soon. What kind of crisis? Bankruptcy, probably. Possibly criminal charges if his employer discovers he's been misusing company resources to fund his affair. I showed Vanessa evidence that Kevin had been using his company credit card for personal expenses related to his relationship with Jessica, a form of embezzlement that could result in his termination and legal prosecution. Vanessa, you need to protect your own credit rating and financial stability before Kevin's problems become your problems. How do I do that? Talk to a lawyer about your options. Document Kevin's debt load and hidden spending. Consider whether you want to be legally responsible for debts you didn't know existed. Vanessa was crying now, not just from sadness, but from fear about her and Emma's future. Ted, what happens to Emma if I leave Kevin? How do I explain to an 8-year-old that her father is a liar and a cheat? You tell her age-appropriate truths and protect her from the adult details. But Vanessa, staying with Kevin means exposing Emma to his continued deception and the chaos that's coming when his lies catch up with him. What about you? If I leave Kevin, what happens to your relationship with Emma? That question got to the heart of what I'd been struggling with throughout this entire situation. Vanessa, I love Emma more than life itself, but I won't use my relationship with her to pressure you into staying in a marriage that's built on lies and debt. What if Kevin changes? What if confronting him about all this makes him want to rebuild our marriage honestly? I thought about everything I'd learned about Kevin over the past months, his cruelty toward me, his elaborate deceptions, his complete lack of remorse for any of his actions. Vanessa, people can change, but only if they want to. Kevin would have to acknowledge that he's been lying to you for years, stealing from me, and betraying every value you thought you shared. Do you think he's capable of that kind of honesty and accountability? Vanessa was quiet again, considering everything she'd learned and everything she knew about her husband's character. Ted, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why didn't you just expose Kevin immediately when you discovered what he was doing? Why did you wait all these months to tell me the truth? Because I hoped there was some decency left in him that would emerge if I gave him enough time and opportunities. I wanted to believe that the son I raised was still there somewhere underneath all the selfishness. And now I know that Kevin has made his choices about what kind of person he wants to be. My job is to protect the people who deserve protection and stop enabling someone who has chosen cruelty over compassion. Vanessa nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to verify this information independently and make your own decisions about your future. But I also need you to know that whatever happens, Emma will always be my granddaughter, and I will always want to be part of her life, if you'll allow it. As we said goodbye that afternoon, I realized that Vanessa was about to face the same choice I'd been facing for months. Whether to continue enabling Kevin's behavior or to demand accountability for his actions. The difference was that Vanessa had an 8-year-old daughter to protect, which meant her decisions carried consequences that went far beyond her own life. But I also knew that Margaret would be proud of me for giving Vanessa the information she needed to make informed choices about her future, even if those choices ultimately cost me my relationship with Emma. Sometimes protecting the people you love means risking losing them. The Sunday after receiving James's devastating report, I did something I hadn't done since Margaret's funeral. I drove to Greenwood Cemetery and sat by her grave for several hours, having the conversation I should have had months ago. Maggie, I failed. I failed as a father, and now I don't know how to fix what I created. The headstone was simple granite with Margaret's name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Wife and Mother." Looking at those words, I realized that Kevin's cruelty wasn't just directed at me, it was a betrayal of everything Margaret had tried to instill in him during her lifetime. He's become someone you wouldn't recognize, sweetheart. Someone who treats family relationships like business transactions, who lies to his wife, who plans to steal from his own father. I thought about all the conversations Margaret and I had, about parenting, about the importance of teaching Kevin values that would serve him throughout his life. We'd focused so much on giving him opportunities that we'd forgotten to teach him responsibility. Remember when Kevin was 16 and he crashed the car after that party? You wanted to let him face the consequences, deal with the police and insurance companies himself. I convinced you to handle it quietly, to protect his future. Margaret had argued that facing real consequences would teach Kevin more than being rescued from his mistakes. But I'd been so afraid of anything damaging Kevin's prospects that I'd chosen to shield him from reality. I did that over and over. Again, didn't I? Every time Kevin made a bad choice, I found a way to fix it instead of letting him learn from it. The pattern was clear now. Kevin's current behavior wasn't a sudden personality change. It was the logical result of 35 years of learning that other people would always clean up his messes and that his actions didn't have lasting consequences. He's having an affair, Maggie. While you were dying, while I was caring for you every day, our son was starting a relationship with another woman behind his wife's back. The betrayal felt personal to Margaret's memory. She'd loved Vanessa like a daughter, had been so proud when Kevin married her, had doted on Emma with all the love of a grandmother who'd waited years for a grandchild. Kevin was destroying everything Margaret had cherished about our family. I should have listened to you all those years ago. I should have been stronger, more demanding about character and values, instead of just trying to make Kevin happy. But sitting there in the cemetery, I also realized that dwelling on past mistakes wouldn't solve current problems. Margaret was gone. Kevin was an adult responsible for his own choices, and I had decisions to make about how to handle the situation I was facing. What would you do, sweetheart? How would you protect Vanessa and Emma without destroying them in the process? I could almost hear Margaret's voice in my mind, reminding me of conversations we'd had about difficult family situations over the years. Margaret had always believed in truth, even when it was painful, because she knew that lies eventually caused more damage than honesty. Margaret would want Vanessa to know about Kevin's debts and his affair before she made any more life decisions based on false information. Margaret would want Emma to understand that her grandfather's absence wasn't due to illness, but to her father's cruelty. Most importantly, Margaret would want me to use my resources to help people who deserved help, rather than enabling someone who had chosen to hurt the people who loved him. I'm going to expose Kevin's lies, Maggie, all of them. Not out of revenge, but because the people he's deceiving deserve to know the truth. I stayed at Margaret's grave until sunset, making plans and thinking through the implications of what I was about to do. When I finally left the cemetery, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Kevin forced me out of our home, a sense of purpose and determination. The next morning, I called my attorney and scheduled a meeting to update my will and estate planning documents. Harold, I need to make some significant changes to my inheritance plans. Harold Davidson had been my attorney for 15 years. He'd handled Margaret's will, our property transfers, and knew enough about my financial situation to understand the implications of what I was considering. Ted, are you sure you want to make major changes while you're still grieving? Sometimes it's better to wait until emotional decisions have time to settle. Harold, this isn't about grief. This is about information I've discovered about Kevin's character and behavior that changes everything about how I want my assets distributed. I explained Kevin's treatment of me since Margaret's death, his lies about the $50,000 investment, his affair, his plans to have me declared incompetent, and his systematic deception of his own wife. Harold listened with growing concern. Ted, these are serious allegations. Do you have documentation? I have a complete investigative report with financial records, photographs, and recorded evidence. What changes do you want to make? I want to remove Kevin as a beneficiary completely. I want to establish trust funds for Emma's education and future that Kevin cannot access or control. And I want to create a foundation that will use the bulk of my assets to help families in genuine need. Harold took notes carefully. What about your daughter-in-law? Do you want to provide for Vanessa? I want to establish a fund that will help Vanessa and Emma if they need financial support, but only if they're no longer living with Kevin. I don't want my money used to enable his continued deception and abuse. The legal work would take a few weeks to complete properly, but Harold agreed to prioritize the documents given the urgency of the situation. Ted, Once these changes are finalized, Kevin will no longer have any claim to your estate. Are you prepared for his reaction when he discovers this? Harold, Kevin believes he's stealing from an elderly man with limited resources. When he discovers I had $18 million that he'll never see, I think his reaction will reveal exactly who he really is. That evening I called Vanessa. I hadn't spoken to her since the uncomfortable conversation at my former home, and I needed to test whether Kevin's lies about my mental state had completely poisoned her opinion of me. Vanessa, this is Ted. I was hoping we could meet for coffee sometime this week. There are some things about Kevin that I need to discuss with you. There was a long pause. Ted, Kevin said you might call. He's concerned that you've been having some confusion about family matters. Vanessa, I'm not confused. I have information about Kevin's financial situation and personal behavior that you need to know about before you make any major decisions. About your future. I don't think that's appropriate, Ted. Kevin handles our finances, and our personal life is really none of your business. What if I told you that Kevin is $200,000 in debt and has been hiding this from you for months? Another pause, longer this time. That's impossible. Kevin shows me our bank statements every month. We're doing fine financially. Vanessa, Kevin has been creating fake bank statements and hiding his real spending from you. He's also been having an affair with a co-worker named Jessica Palmer. Ted, I think you need to talk to a doctor. Kevin warned me that you might start making accusations that don't make sense. Kevin's groundwork had been thorough. Vanessa genuinely believed that I was experiencing mental decline and that my accusations were symptoms of cognitive problems. Vanessa, would you be willing to meet with me if I bring documentation? Bank records, photographs, evidence that you can verify independently? I don't know. This is very upsetting. I understand. But Vanessa, you're my daughter-in-law. I've known you for 10 years. Have I ever lied to you or shown signs of mental confusion before Margaret's death? No, but Kevin says that grief can cause these kinds of problems in elderly people. Then let me prove to you that I'm thinking clearly. Give me 1 hour to show you evidence, and if you're not convinced, I'll never contact you again. Vanessa agreed to meet me Thursday afternoon at a neutral location. I had 4 days to prepare the presentation that would either save her from Kevin's deceptions or destroy any remaining relationship I might have with my granddaughter, but I knew what Margaret would want me to do. She'd want me to fight for the truth, even if it cost me everything. 2 days after my meeting with Vanessa, Rose knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen from her before. Fear mixed with embarrassment. The look of someone who needed help, but was ashamed to ask for it. Ted, I'm sorry to bother you, but I don't know who else to turn to. Rose had always been the strong one in our friendship, the person who brought soup when I was struggling, who offered comfort when I was grieving, who listened without judgment when I needed to process Kevin's betrayals. Seeing her vulnerable and frightened was deeply unsettling. Rose, what's wrong? Come in, sit down. She settled into my small kitchen chair with the careful movements of someone trying to maintain dignity while their world was falling apart. I've been scammed, Ted. I lost almost everything I had saved for retirement. Rose explained that she'd received a phone call 3 weeks earlier from someone claiming to be a government official investigating fraud in her Social Security account. The caller had been convincing, professional, and had created a sense of urgency that had overwhelmed her usually careful judgment. They said someone was using my Social Security number to open credit accounts and that my benefits were going to be suspended unless I took immediate action to protect my account. The scammer had convinced Rose to withdraw money from her savings account and purchase gift cards that she then read the numbers from over the phone, supposedly to secure her Social Security benefits while the investigation proceeded. $22,000, Ted, almost everything I had put away for emergencies and future care needs. Rose had realized she'd been scammed only when she tried to follow up with the Social Security Administration and was told that no such investigation existed and that government agencies never ask people to purchase gift cards for any reason. I reported it to the police, but they said the chances of recovering any money are essentially zero. These scammers operate from other countries and disappear as soon as they've gotten what they want. Rose was facing a financial crisis that threatened her ability to continue living independently. Her monthly Social Security check covered her basic living expenses, but she no longer had any cushion for emergencies, medical bills, or unexpected costs. The worst part is feeling so stupid. I pride myself on being careful, on not falling for these kinds of tricks. How could I be so gullible? Rose, you're not stupid. These people are professionals who specialize in manipulating decent people during moments of fear and confusion. But I could see that Rose's self-recrimination went deeper than just the financial loss. She was questioning her own judgment, her ability to live independently, her competence to make important decisions about her future. My daughter in Seattle says I should move in with her family, that this proves I can't handle living alone anymore. Maybe she's right. Rose's daughter lived in a cramped apartment with her husband and 2 teenagers. Rose would essentially be giving up her independence to become a burden on a family that was already struggling with their own financial pressures. Rose, one mistake doesn't invalidate your ability to live independently. You've been taking care of yourself successfully for 8 years since your husband died. But what if something like this happens again? What if I make another expensive mistake that I can't afford? I looked at this woman who had shown me more genuine friendship and kindness than my own son had in the past year, and I made a decision that felt more right than anything I'd done since Margaret's death. Rose, what if I told you that you don't have to choose between financial security and independence? What do you mean? I explained to Rose about my inheritance, though I understated the amount significantly to avoid overwhelming her. I have more money than I'll ever be able to spend, and I've been looking for ways to use it to help people who deserve help. You've been kinder to me over the past year than my own family. Let me help you recover from this setback. Ted, I can't accept charity. I've always paid my own way. This isn't charity, Rose. This is friendship. This is me using resources I never expected to have to help someone who has helped me survive the worst year of my life. But $22,000, that's too much. Rose, what if I told you that $22,000 represents less than 1 day's worth of interest earnings on my investments? Would that change how you feel about accepting help? I convinced Rose to let me replace the money she'd lost to the scammers, but I also did something more. I arranged for a financial advisor to set up a modest but secure retirement fund that would give Rose true long-term security without making her feel like a charity case. This fund will generate enough monthly income to supplement your Social Security and give you the financial cushion you need for independence and peace of mind. Rose cried when she realized that her crisis was over, that she wouldn't have to move in with her daughter or sacrifice her autonomy because of one expensive mistake. Ted, how can I ever repay you for this? Rose, you've already repaid me 100 times over. You've shown me what authentic friendship looks like. You've demonstrated that some people value character over money, loyalty over convenience. But helping Rose also clarified something important about my situation with Kevin. Rose had made one mistake that cost her money, and she was devastated by the impact on her independence and self-respect. Kevin had made dozens of deliberate choices to lie, cheat, steal, and manipulate, yet he felt entitled to continued support and resources from the family he was betraying. The contrast was stark and revealing. That evening, Rose insisted on cooking dinner for both of us in her apartment, using ingredients that she could now afford without worry for the first time in weeks. Ted, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you being so generous with me when your own son has treated you so badly? Don't you want to save your money for family? Rose, family isn't defined by blood. Family is defined by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. You've shown me more of all three in 1 year than Kevin has shown me in the past decade. But he's still your son. Yes, and he'll always be my son. But that doesn't mean I'm obligated to enable his cruelty or reward, his betrayals with money he hasn't earned and doesn't deserve. Rose nodded thoughtfully. Your wife would be proud of how you're handling this situation. I hope so. Margaret always believed that wealth was a responsibility, that having resources meant using them to help people who couldn't help themselves. Like elderly women who fall for scams, like faithful friends who deserve security and dignity in their retirement years. As I walked back to my apartment that night, I realized that helping Rose had given me something I'd been missing since Margaret's death. A sense of purpose and meaning that went beyond my grief and anger about Kevin's behavior. I had $18 million and a clear understanding of how Margaret would want me to use it, not to enable selfish people who took love for granted, but to help deserving people who had been kind and loyal when kindness and loyalty weren't convenient. Kevin had taught me who didn't deserve my money. Rose had shown me who did. 3 weeks after helping Rose and 1 week after my confrontation with Vanessa, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. I was walking through Riverside Park, the same park where I used to take Kevin when he was a child, when I heard a familiar voice calling my name, Grandpa Ted, Grandpa Ted. I turned around to see Emma running toward me, her blonde hair streaming behind her, her face lit up with the pure joy that only children can display. Behind her, about 50 yards away, Vanessa was chasing after her, clearly trying to catch. Up Emma threw herself into my arms with the enthusiastic affection of a child who didn't understand why the adult world had become so complicated. Grandpa, I've missed you so much. Why haven't you come to see me? My heart broke at the innocence of her question. Emma had no idea about the family drama that had been unfolding around her, no understanding of why her grandfather had suddenly disappeared from her life. I've missed you too, sweetheart, more than you know. Daddy said you were sick and couldn't have visitors. Are you feeling better now? Before I could answer, Vanessa reached us, slightly out of breath and looking deeply uncomfortable about the encounter. Emma, we need to go. We're supposed to meet your friend Sarah at the playground. But Mom, it's Grandpa Ted. I want to talk to him. Emma turned back to me with the directness that children use when they want honest answers from adults. Grandpa, Daddy says you have a sickness that makes you forget things, and that's why you can't live in our house anymore. But you seem fine. To me. I looked at Vanessa, who was clearly struggling with how to handle this unexpected encounter. Her expression showed the conflict between wanting to protect Emma from adult complications and knowing that her daughter deserved some version of the truth. Emma, I said carefully, sometimes adults disagree about things and it can be confusing. But I want you to know that I love you very much and I think about you every day. Then why don't you visit me anymore? I asked Daddy if we could go see your new apartment, but he said it wouldn't be good for you. Emma's questions were cutting. Through all the lies and manipulations that had surrounded my situation with Kevin, children have a way of exposing adult deceptions simply by asking direct questions about things that don't make sense to them. Sweetheart, the reason I haven't visited is complicated. It's not because I don't want to see you. Is it because Daddy doesn't want you to visit? The question was so perceptive that both Vanessa and I were startled. Emma had somehow understood that her father was the obstacle to seeing her grandfather, even though she'd been told a completely different story. Vanessa knelt down to Emma's level. Honey, why would you think Daddy doesn't want Grandpa to visit? Because when I ask about Grandpa Ted, Daddy gets mad and changes the subject. And when I said I wanted to send Grandpa a get-well card, Daddy said it wasn't necessary. Emma had been picking up on Kevin's emotional cues and body language, even though she wasn't old enough to understand the full context of what she was observing. "Grandpa," Emma continued, "are you really sick? Because you look the same as you. Always did." "I'm not sick, Emma. I'm sad sometimes because I miss Grandma Margaret and because I don't get to spend time with you, but I'm not sick in the way your daddy described." Vanessa intervened gently. "Emma, grown-up relationships are complicated sometimes. There are things happening that are hard to explain to children. But I'm not stupid, Mom. I know when adults are telling me stories that don't make sense." Emma's comment revealed something important about how Kevin's lies were affecting her. She was learning not to trust the information adults gave her because she could sense that the explanations didn't match the reality she was observing. "Emma," I said, "you're right that sometimes adults don't tell children the whole truth about complicated situations, but I want you to know that my love for you is never complicated. That part is simple and true." "Then why can't we spend time together?" "Because your daddy and I disagree about some important things, and until we work those disagreements out, it's difficult for us to be around each other." Emma processed this explanation with the seriousness that children bring to information that affects their world. "Are you mad at Daddy? I'm disappointed in some choices your daddy has made. But Emma, none of the problems between your daddy and me have anything to do with you. You are perfect, and you are loved." Vanessa was watching this conversation with growing emotional complexity. I could see her struggling with the knowledge she'd gained about Kevin's deceptions and her desire to protect Emma from family trauma. "Grandpa, if you and Daddy work out your disagreements, can we have sleepovers again?" The question nearly brought me to tears. Emma was holding on to hope for a family reconciliation that I knew was unlikely to happen, at least not in the way she was imagining. "Emma, I would love nothing more than to have sleepovers with you again, but that depends on your daddy being willing to have honest conversations about the things we disagree about." "What do you disagree about?" Vanessa stepped in before I could answer. "Emma, those are adult matters that you don't need to worry about. What matters is that both Grandpa Ted and Daddy love you very much." Emma accepted this explanation, but I could see her filing away questions that she would probably ask again when she was older and better able to understand complex family dynamics. "Grandpa, can I hug you again before we go?" I held Emma for a long moment, memorizing the feeling of her small arms around my neck, her complete trust and affection, despite all the confusion that had been created around our relationship. "I love you, Emma. Don't ever forget that. I love you too, Grandpa Ted." As Vanessa led Emma away toward the playground, Emma turned back to wave at me multiple times until they disappeared around a bend in the path. That encounter with Emma crystallized something important for me. Kevin's lies weren't just hurting me. They were confusing and potentially damaging a child who deserved honesty and stability in her family relationships. Emma was learning that adults couldn't be trusted to tell her the truth about important matters affecting her life. She was developing coping strategies for navigating a world where the information she received didn't match the reality she observed. Most importantly, Emma was being deprived of a relationship with her grandfather not because of any real danger or incompatibility, but because of her father's selfishness and cruelty. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything about how I planned to handle my situation with Kevin. Emma deserved better than to grow up surrounded by lies and manipulation. She deserved to understand that family relationships could be based on honesty, loyalty, and genuine love, rather than deception and control. Kevin had been using his power as Emma's father to control information and relationships in ways that served his interests rather than his daughter's well-being. It was time to make sure Emma knew the truth about who her grandfather really was and what her father had chosen to do with the love and resources that had been offered to him. After my encounter with Emma in the park, I spent sleepless nights thinking about the conversation that was coming. Not just with Kevin, but with everyone who had been affected by his lies and manipulations. The time for subtle tests and patient observation was over. I called Harold Davidson and scheduled an emergency meeting to finalize the changes to my will and estate planning. Harold, I need everything completed this week. I'm going to reveal my financial situation to my family, and I want all legal protections in place before that happens. Ted, are you sure you're ready for this confrontation? Once you reveal the extent of your assets, there's no going back to your current situation. I'm ready. Kevin has had months to demonstrate any decency or remorse for his behavior. Instead, he's escalated his lies and cruelty while planning to steal even more from me. Harold had prepared documents that would protect my assets from any attempts by Tenta Novament VD, Kevin to claim them through legal challenges or manipulation. The new will removed Kevin entirely as a beneficiary, established a substantial trust fund for Emma's education and future that Kevin couldn't access, and created provisions for Vanessa if she chose to leave her marriage. The foundation will receive the bulk of your estate, Harold explained. $12 million dedicated to helping families facing financial crises due to medical emergencies, elder abuse, and other situations beyond their control. What about the remaining $6 million? $2 million in trust for Emma, accessible when she turns 21 for education and 25 for general use. $1 million for Vanessa if she's divorced from Kevin within 2 years. The rest for smaller bequests to people who have shown you genuine friendship and loyalty. Rose would receive enough to ensure her complete financial security for life. My sister Sarah would get a substantial amount to help with her own retirement. Several other people who had shown me kindness during this difficult year would be remembered. Harold, I also want you to prepare a detailed letter explaining my decisions. I want everyone to understand exactly why Kevin was disinherited and why the money is going to people who have demonstrated character and compassion. But the legal preparations were only part of what I needed to do. I also needed to coordinate with James Morrison to ensure that all evidence of Kevin's behavior was properly documented and ready to present. Mr. Harrison, I've prepared a comprehensive report that includes financial records, photographs of the affair, documentation of his lies to family members, and evidence of his plans to have you declared incompetent. James, I need you to do one more thing. I want you to contact Vanessa independently and offer to verify any information she wants to check about Kevin's behavior. Are you sure? That might accelerate the timeline for family confrontations. I'm sure Vanessa deserves to have all the facts before she makes decisions about her marriage and Emma's future. I also needed to prepare Rose for what was coming. She was going to be in the middle of a family explosion, and I wanted her to understand why I was taking such drastic action. Ted, are you certain this is the right approach? Once you reveal your wealth and disinherit Kevin, there's no possibility of reconciliation. Rose, there was never any real possibility of reconciliation. Kevin has shown me exactly who he is, and that person is incapable of the honesty and accountability that real relationships require. What about Emma? Emma is the main reason I'm doing this. She deserves to grow up knowing that family relationships can be based on truth and genuine love. Right now, she's learning that adults lie, manipulate, and use children as pawns in their personal conflicts. I spent the next few days writing letters to each person who would be affected by my revelations. A letter to Emma explaining why her Grandfather had disappeared from her life and assuring her that she had always been loved. A letter to Vanessa providing additional resources and support for whatever decisions she made about her future. A letter to Kevin explaining exactly how his choices had led to his complete disinheritance. But the most important letter was one I wrote to Margaret, though I would never send it. I needed to process my own feelings about what I was about to do and make sure my motivations were right. Maggie, I'm about to destroy what's left of our family, and I need you to know why. Kevin has become someone neither of us would recognize. Cruel, selfish, manipulative, and completely lacking in remorse for the pain he causes others. Writing to Margaret helped me clarify that I wasn't acting out of revenge or hurt feelings. I was acting to protect innocent people from Kevin's continued abuse and to ensure that my resources went to people who would use them for good rather than evil. I've failed as a father in many ways, but I won't fail in my responsibility to protect Emma and Vanessa from Kevin's lies or to help people like Rose who deserve support and kindness. Harold called on Friday afternoon to confirm that all documents were finalized and legally binding. Ted, everything is in place. Kevin has no legal claim to any portion of your estate, and all beneficiaries are protected from any attempts at coercion or manipulation. What happens if Kevin tries to challenge the will? He can try, but we've documented his behavior extensively, and the will includes specific language about why he was disinherited. Unless he can prove mental incompetence on your part, which would be impossible given the extensive planning and documentation involved, he has no grounds for a successful challenge. That evening, I sat in my small apartment looking at the evidence James had gathered, the legal documents Harold had prepared, and the letters I'd written to each family member. Everything was ready for the confrontation that would change all of our lives forever. I called Kevin and left a message asking him to meet me Sunday afternoon at Harold's office for an important discussion about family finances and inheritance. In planning, Kevin called back within an hour, his voice eager and excited. Dad, I'm glad you're finally ready to talk about practical matters. I think this conversation is long overdue. Kevin had no idea that he was agreeing to attend his own financial execution, the meeting where he would discover that his cruelty and greed had cost him $18 million. But I also knew that Kevin's reaction to learning the truth would reveal whether there was any possibility of redemption in his character, or whether he was truly lost to the values Margaret and I had tried to instill in him. Sunday afternoon would answer that question once and for all. The silence in Harold's conference room after Kevin learned about his disinheritance was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was the sound of a man's world completely collapsing, of 35 years of assumptions and entitlements crashing. Down in a single moment, Kevin sat staring at the estate documents, his hands shaking as he tried to process what he'd just learned. $18 million, he whispered. You had $18 million and you watched me. Kevin, I watched you reveal your true character when you thought I was powerless to stop you. Kevin's shock was rapidly transforming into something uglier, rage mixed with desperate calculation. Dad, this is insane. You can't just give away my inheritance because of some misunderstandings about family dynamics. Kevin, these weren't misunderstandings. You forced your grieving father out of his home, stole his money, lied to your wife for years, betrayed your marriage, and planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal even more. Kevin looked around the room for support, for anyone who might validate his perspective on what had happened. Vanessa, you understand, right? Dad is being influenced by people who want to turn him against his own family. Vanessa stared at her husband with an expression of complete disgust. Kevin, I've seen the evidence. I know about Jessica. I know about the debts. I know about everything you've hidden from me. Vanessa, we can work through this. Marriage counseling, financial planning, whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship. Kevin, you used our daughter as a weapon against your father. You lied to an 8-year-old child about why she couldn't see her grandfather. What kind of man does that? Emma, who had been listening to this adult conversation with the intense focus that children bring to discussions that affect their world, spoke up in her clear, direct way. "Daddy, did you really lie about Grandpa Ted being sick?" Kevin looked at his daughter, perhaps realizing for the first time that his actions had consequences beyond his own immediate desires. "Emma, it's complicated. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions. That's not an answer, Daddy. Did you lie to me or not?" The directness of Emma's question forced Kevin to confront the reality that his 8-year-old daughter was more honest and straightforward than he had been in months of family interactions. "Yes, Emma, I lied to you about Grandpa Ted being sick." "Why?" "Because I was angry with him and I didn't want him to be part of our family anymore." Emma processed this information with the seriousness that children bring to discovering that adults they trust have deliberately deceived them. "Daddy, lying is wrong. You always tell me that lying is wrong." Kevin's face crumpled as he realized that his daughter was holding him to the same moral standards he had tried to teach her. "Emma, you're right. Lying is wrong, and I was wrong to lie to you." But Kevin's moment of apparent remorse was quickly overshadowed by his desperation about his financial situation. "Dad, look, I admit I made mistakes, but cutting me out of your will completely? That's an overreaction. We're family. Family forgives each other and works through problems." "Kevin, where was that attitude about family forgiveness when you were forcing me out of my home and planning to steal my independence? That was different. I genuinely thought you needed help managing your life." James Morrison spoke up, opening another folder of evidence. "Mr. Kevin Harrison, would you like me to read your communications with the financial advisor about gaining guardianship over your father's assets? Your exact words were, 'The old man has more money than he's admitting, and I need to find a way to access it before he wastes it on medical care or gives it away to charities.'" Kevin's face went white as he realized that his most private and calculating thoughts about me had been documented and recorded. "Kevin," Vanessa said, her voice hollow with disappointment, "you were planning to steal from your own father." "I wasn't stealing. I was accessing my inheritance early because I needed the money, and he obviously wasn't using it effectively." Harold intervened with the calm authority of someone who had witnessed many family financial disputes. "Mr. Kevin Harrison, your father's money was never your inheritance. It was his money to dispose of as he saw fit. Your sense of entitlement to assets you never earned is part of what led to this situation." Kevin looked around the room one more time, seeing his wife's disgust, his daughter's confusion, his father's disappointment, and the legal documents that had destroyed his financial future. "Fine," he said, his voice taking on the cold tone I'd heard when he forced me out of my home. "If that's how you want to play this, Dad, then that's how we'll play it." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you want to give away $18 million to spite your only son, then you're obviously not mentally competent to make financial decisions. I'll have you declared incompetent and overturn this ridiculous will." Kevin's mask had finally slipped completely. With his back against the wall, he was revealing exactly who he was. Someone willing to destroy his father's autonomy and independence for money. "Kevin," Harold said calmly, "your father anticipated that threat. We have 6 months of documented evidence showing his complete mental competence, including medical evaluations, psychological assessments, and detailed financial planning sessions. Any attempt to challenge his competency would be frivolous and would likely result in sanctions against you and your attorney." Kevin realized that his last desperate gambit had been anticipated and blocked. "Dad, you've thought of everything, haven't you? You've systematically destroyed your own son to protect money you can't even spend before you die." "Kevin, I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself with your choices. I just stopped enabling those choices with my resources. Vanessa stood up, taking Emma's hand. Kevin, I'll be filing for divorce this week. Emma and I will be moving out of the house. Vanessa, you can't take Emma away from me because of financial problems. I'm not taking Emma away because of financial problems. I'm taking her away because you're a liar who uses children as weapons against people who love them. Emma looked up at her mother with confusion and sadness. Mommy, what's divorce? It means Mommy and Daddy won't be married anymore, sweetheart. But both of us will still love you and take care of you. Emma turned to me with the trust that children place in adults who have always been honest with them. Grandpa Ted, can I still see you even if Mommy and Daddy get divorced? I knelt down to Emma's level, speaking directly to her, while the adults around us dealt with the wreckage of Kevin's choices. Emma, I will always want to see you and spend time with you as long as your mommy says it's okay. And you won't lie to me anymore about grown-up things? I will always tell you the truth in ways that you can understand. Kevin watched this exchange between his daughter and his father, perhaps finally understanding what he had lost through his cruelty and deception. Dad, what if I change? What if I prove to you that I can be better? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and failed in so many ways, and felt something that surprised me. Not anger or hatred, but sadness for the person he could have been. Kevin, people can change, but only if they genuinely want to. So far, you've only shown remorse when facing consequences, not genuine understanding of how your actions have hurt other people. What would it take? What would I have to do to earn back some portion of my inheritance? Kevin, you can't earn back money that was never yours to begin with. But you might be able to earn back relationships with the people you've hurt if you're willing to do the hard work of becoming honest and accountable. And if I do that work, if I prove I've changed, then you'll have something more valuable than money. You'll have genuine relationships based on trust and respect instead of fear and manipulation. Kevin looked around the room one final time, seeing the consequences of years of selfish choices laid out in legal documents and broken relationships. What happens now? Now you learn to live with the choices you've made, I said, and the rest of us learn to build better lives without your toxic influence. As Kevin left Harold's office that day, I realized that our father-son relationship was essentially over. But I also realized that Emma and Vanessa now had the chance to build lives based on honesty and genuine love, rather than lies and financial manipulation. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to face the consequences of their choices without rescue or enablement. Kevin was finally going to learn what his character was worth when it wasn't subsidized by other people's money and patience. Sunday afternoon arrived grey and cold, matching my mood as I prepared for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. I arrived at Harold's office 30 minutes early, needing time to center myself for what was coming. Harold had arranged the conference room carefully. The evidence was organized in folders, the legal documents were prepared for presentation, and James Morrison was present as both witness and investigator. Kevin arrived exactly on time, dressed in one of his expensive suits and carrying a leather portfolio that suggested he'd prepared materials of his own for this meeting. Dad, Harold, thank you for arranging this. I think it's time we had a comprehensive discussion about your financial situation and future planning. Kevin's confidence was striking. He clearly believed this meeting was going to work in his favor, that he was finally going to gain access to what he assumed were my modest assets. Kevin, before we begin, I want you to know that Vanessa has been invited to attend this meeting. She should be here shortly. Kevin's expression flickered with surprise and something that might have been concern. Why would Vanessa need to be here? This is about your estate planning, not our marriage. Kevin, your marriage is going to be very relevant to today's discussion. 10 minutes later, Vanessa arrived with Emma. I was surprised to see my granddaughter, but Vanessa explained that she couldn't find childcare on short notice. Emma can wait in the reception area with some books and activities, Harold suggested. Actually, I said, I think Emma should stay. There are things being discussed today that will affect her future, and she's old enough to understand the basics of what's happening. Kevin immediately objected. Dad, this isn't appropriate. Emma doesn't need to be involved in adult financial discussions. Kevin, Emma has been involved since you started lying to her about why she can't see her grandfather anymore. She deserves to know the truth. Harold began the meeting by outlining the basic purpose of our gathering. We're here to discuss Mr. Harrison's estate planning and to address some concerns about family financial matters that have come to light recently. What kind of concerns? Kevin asked. I opened the first folder and placed Kevin's credit card statements on the table. Concerns about your debt load of $200,000, your affair with Jessica Palmer, and your systematic lies to your wife about your financial situation. Kevin's face went white, but he recovered quickly. Dad, I don't know where you got this information, but there are explanations for everything you think you've discovered. Kevin, these are your actual credit card statements. Your wife can verify the account numbers. There's no explanation that makes this level of deception acceptable. Vanessa was studying the documents with growing horror. Kevin, are these real? Vanessa, don't let him manipulate you with paperwork that's probably outdated or taken out of context. James Morrison spoke for the first time. Mr. Kevin Harrison, I'm a licensed private investigator, and I can authenticate every document in these folders. Would you like me to explain my investigative methods? Kevin realized he was trapped, but he tried one more deflection. Dad, even if some of this information is accurate, it doesn't change the fact that you need professional help managing your finances and making decisions about your future. Kevin, that brings us to the main purpose of today's meeting. Harold pulled out the estate planning documents and placed them on the table. Your father asked me to prepare these documents after learning about your behavior over the past year. Kevin leaned forward eagerly. Finally. Dad, I'm ready to help you organize your assets and create a comprehensive plan for your care and financial management. Kevin, I said quietly, these documents remove you entirely as a beneficiary of my estate. The silence in the room was deafening. Kevin stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean, remove me as a beneficiary? I mean, you will inherit nothing from me when I die. No money, no property, no assets of any kind. Kevin's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally panic. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm your only child. You can't just disinherit me over some misunderstandings about... Kevin, I'm not disinheriting you over misunderstandings. I'm disinheriting you because you forced me out of my home, stole my money, lied to your wife, betrayed your marriage vows, and planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal even more. Dad, that's not... I never planned to steal anything. Everything I did was because I was concerned about your well-being. Vanessa spoke up for the first time. Kevin, stop lying. I've seen the evidence. I know about Jessica. I know about the debts. I know about everything. Emma, who had been quietly coloring at a side table, looked up with the perceptive attention that children bring to adult conversations that affect their world. Daddy, why is everyone upset? What did you do? Kevin looked at his daughter, perhaps realizing for the first time that his actions were going to affect her life in ways he'd never considered. Emma, this is just adult business. Nothing for you to worry about. Kevin, I said, Emma deserves to know why her grandfather disappeared from her life. She deserves to know that it wasn't because I was sick or dangerous, but because you chose to cut off our relationship. I turned to Emma, speaking directly to her in language she could understand. "Emma, your daddy told people that I was sick and couldn't have visitors. That wasn't true. Your daddy was angry with me about grown-up things, and he decided that you and I couldn't spend time together anymore." "Daddy, is that true? You said Grandpa Ted was too sick to see me." Kevin looked at his daughter, his wife, his father, and the legal documents that had just destroyed his financial future, and something inside him broke. "This is insane. Dad, you're 87 years old and living in a one-bedroom apartment. How much money could you possibly have to disinherit me from?" Harold answered the question that would change everything Kevin thought he knew about his situation. "Your father's estate is valued at approximately $18 million. Kevin's mouth fell open. Vanessa gasped. Even Emma looked up from her coloring book. 18 million? That's impossible. Dad, you were a government accountant. You lived in a modest house, drove an old car. Kevin, I invested carefully for 40 years. I bought technology stocks before anyone understood their potential. I purchased real estate in areas that appreciated dramatically. While you were assuming I was poor, I was quietly becoming wealthy." Kevin stared at the estate documents. Finally, understanding the magnitude of what his behavior had cost him. "Dad, if you have $18 million, why did you let me force you out of the house? Why didn't you just tell me you were wealthy? Because I wanted to see who you really were. When you thought I was powerless, I wanted to understand what kind of person I'd raised." Kevin's desperation was becoming obvious. "Dad, I can change. I can fix my marriage, pay off my debts, become the son you want me to be." "Kevin, you've had 35 years to become a person you wanted to be. You've shown me exactly who that person is." Emma spoke up again, her child's voice cutting through the adult tension. "Grandpa Ted, does this mean I can see you again?" I looked at this beautiful little girl who had been caught in the middle of her father's lies and manipulations. "Emma, that depends on your mommy and daddy working out their grown-up problems. But I want you to know that I love you very much, and I will always want to be part of your life." Kevin looked around the room at the wreckage of his life. His marriage exposed as built on lies, his financial crimes documented, his inheritance gone, his daughter confused and hurt by his deceptions. "What happens now?" he asked, in a voice that had lost all its earlier confidence. "Now you face the consequences of your choices," I said, "and the rest of us figure out how to move forward without you." 6 months later, I was sitting in my new house, not a mansion, but a comfortable 3-bedroom home with a garden where I could grow the flowers Margaret had loved, watching Emma help me plant tomatoes in the backyard. Vanessa had finalized her divorce from Kevin and moved into a small house nearby with money from the trust I'd established for her future. Emma spent weekends with me, and for the first time in over a year, I was part of my granddaughter's life in a meaningful way. "Grandpa Ted, why do tomatoes need so much water?" Emma asked, carefully following my instructions for watering the seedlings. "Because growing things need consistent care and attention to become strong and healthy," I told her. Just like people, Emma had adjusted to her parents' divorce with the resilience that children often show when adults finally stop lying to them and start creating stable, honest environments. She understood that her father had made bad choices that hurt people, and that sometimes adults have to face consequences for their actions. Kevin's life had collapsed completely in the months following our confrontation at Harold's office. Unable to make payments on his massive debt load, he'd been forced to declare bankruptcy. His affair with Jessica Palmer had been discovered by his employer, leading to his termination for misuse of company resources. He was currently facing criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. But the most devastating consequence for Kevin was losing unsupervised access to Emma. The family court had determined that his pattern of lying to his daughter and using her as a weapon against other family members was emotionally harmful. Kevin could see Emma only during supervised visits, and only if he completed parenting classes and psychological counseling. Has Kevin taken advantage of the supervised visitation opportunities? Rose asked during one of our regular dinner conversations. He's attended 3 sessions in 6 months, I told her. Emma says he spends most of the time complaining about how unfairly he's been treated, rather than focusing on rebuilding their relationship. Kevin had never accepted responsibility for his actions or shown genuine remorse for the pain he'd caused. Instead, he'd spent months trying to convince anyone who would listen that he was the victim of a conspiracy by his father, his ex-wife, and the legal system. But Kevin's refusal to acknowledge his mistakes had consequences beyond his relationship with Emma. Several of his friends and colleagues had distanced themselves from him after learning about his treatment of me and his systematic deception of his family. People don't trust someone who would betray his own father and lie to his wife for years, James Morrison had told me. Kevin's reputation in this community is permanently damaged. Meanwhile, the foundation I'd established with $12 million was already making a significant impact on families facing crises similar to what Rose had experienced. We'd helped dozens of elderly people who had been victimized by scams, families struggling with medical debt, and people facing homelessness due to unexpected financial emergencies. Mr. Harrison, the foundation received over 200 applications for assistance this month, my foundation director reported. We're able to help about 70% of the families who reach out to us. Working with the foundation had given me a sense of purpose and meaning that I'd been missing since Margaret's death. Instead of dwelling on Kevin's betrayals, I was focused on using my resources to help people who were facing genuine hardships through no fault of their own. Rose had become the unofficial grandmother figure for Emma, teaching her to cook traditional recipes and sharing stories about resilience and kindness. Watching Rose and Emma together reminded me that family is defined by love and loyalty rather than blood relationships. Ted, Emma asked me yesterday why some people choose to be mean when they could choose to be kind, Rose told me. How do you explain that to an 8-year-old? What did you tell her? I told her that everyone gets to choose what kind of person they want to be, and that she should choose kindness even when other people choose meanness. Emma was learning lessons about character and values that Kevin had never mastered as an adult. She was discovering that honesty, loyalty, and compassion were more valuable than money or material possessions. Vanessa had enrolled in nursing school, pursuing a career that would give her financial independence and personal fulfillment. The trust fund I'd established would support her education and provide security for her and Emma's future. Ted, I can't thank you enough for giving us the chance to start over, Vanessa said during one of our family dinners. I spent 10 years thinking I was married to a good man who was making difficult but necessary decisions. Now I understand the difference between genuine care and manipulation. Vanessa, you don't need to thank me. You and Emma are my family now, in all the ways that matter. The most challenging part of this new life was explaining Kevin's absence to extended family members and friends who didn't understand the full scope of his behavior. Many people found it difficult to believe that a son could treat his elderly father so cruelly, or that a father could completely disinherit his only child. People want to believe that family relationships always work out, Harold had explained. They're uncomfortable with stories that challenge their assumptions about parental love and filial loyalty. But I'd learned that protecting people from uncomfortable truths often enables continued abuse and manipulation. Kevin had counted on my reluctance to air family business publicly to shield him from consequences for his actions. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is stop protecting someone from the natural results of their choices. Dr. Foster, the family therapist Emma and Vanessa were seeing, had told me. On this particular afternoon, as Emma and I finished Planting the garden, she asked me a question that showed how much she'd grown in understanding over the past 6 months. "Grandpa Ted, do you think Daddy will ever learn to be nicer to people?" "Emma, I hope so, but that's a choice only your daddy can make. We can't make good choices for other people. We can only make good choices for ourselves." "Are you sad that Daddy isn't nice anymore?" I thought about how to answer that question honestly without burdening Emma with adult complexities. "I'm sad about the choices your daddy made, but I'm happy about the choices you and your mommy and I get to make every day. Like choosing to plant tomatoes. Like choosing to plant tomatoes and choosing to be kind to people and choosing to tell the truth even when it's difficult." Emma nodded seriously, then went back to carefully watering the seedlings with the focus that children bring to tasks they consider important. Later that evening, after Emma had gone home with Vanessa, I sat in my garden thinking about Margaret and the values she'd tried to instill in our family. Kevin had rejected those values in favor of selfishness and entitlement. But Emma was learning them fresh, without the corruption of lies and manipulation. Maybe that was Margaret's real legacy, not the son who had chosen cruelty, but the granddaughter who was learning to choose compassion. I pulled out my phone and looked at a text message I'd received that morning from my sister Sarah in Arizona. "Ted, I heard about everything that happened with Kevin. I'm proud of you for protecting Emma and Vanessa and for using your money to help people who really need it. Margaret would be proud too. At 77 years old, I'd learned that the most valuable inheritance you can leave isn't money, it's example." Kevin had inherited money and opportunities, but rejected the values that would have made him worthy of them. Emma was inheriting values and character that would serve her throughout her life, regardless of her financial circumstances. The tomatoes Emma and I had planted would need months of care and attention before they produced fruit. But with consistent nurturing and the right conditions, they would grow into something beautiful and nourishing, just like children, just like relationships, just like the choice to build your life on kindness instead of greed. Kevin had chosen his path, Emma was choosing hers, and I was finally at peace with the role I'd played in both their stories. The end.